How to make your own professional Muppet. This video is sponsored by Puppet Nerd and all of its workshops. Camp Puppet, Camp Puppet 2, and Puppet Maker's Workshop.
To the puppet nerds of the world, this may sound absurd, but this is the place you need to be. We'll do an interview and then we'll stitch and glue all of the dolls, we'll make it shake. If you wanna be in the know and to play like a pro, subscribe to Puppet Nerd.
And if you want to learn even more about how to get started making your own puppet show, check out Puppetry 101. That's going to show you all the ins and outs on how to get started. I highly recommend you try making something other than a frog. The only reason I really use that name is to stick with the theme of all my other patterns. We have the small fry, the medium shake, the Big Mac, and now the fried frog, plus a side of bacon. But really, don't be limited by the name of this pattern. I've already seen a lot of people do some pretty creative stuff with it in our Facebook group, the Cruitinger Puppet Tutorial Q&A. There's a lot of really neat things there. I highly recommend using my free patterns before using any of the paid patterns. Right here, I have an entire playlist for them. Be sure to tackle that project before using any of my paid patterns. The paid patterns are a little bit more advanced, so if you have trouble with the free ones, you'd want to practice a lot more before moving on to the paid ones. I highly recommend you try making your own patterns too. It's a really fun process, and you learn more about how a puppet's put together. And if you use this pattern or any of my patterns, I would love to see your puppet. If you post them on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, make sure to tag me at Adam Cruitinger, and on Facebook at Cruitinger Puppets. We release weekly puppetry videos, everything from learning how to become a puppeteer to puppet building, and we even have our own podcast called Puppeteers. That's where we have interviews with the world's most passionate puppeteers. Be sure to check it out. Welcome back. A couple weeks ago, I released a pattern that showed how to make a very simple puppet. But a lot of people have been commenting on how to make a puppet kind of like Ivan. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the pattern for his head. To start off, we need to create the shape of the head. And we're going to do that using clay. The type of clay I like to use is called monster clay. It's kind of like plasticine clay, but it doesn't have that oily feel to it. It comes in a whole bunch of different hardnesses, and if you're only going to be using it for pattern making, get the softest one that you can. The harder clay is more used for doing sculptures with a high level of detail. Again, not necessary for what we're doing. It helps to have some sort of a stand for your sculpture. I put this together real quick just using a piece of pipe with a flange and just a 3/4 inch piece of wood. This clay is much easier to work with when it's a little bit softer. I've seen people use a heat gun to soften it. The containers are oven safe too, so you can put it in the oven for a couple minutes. Some people even microwave it, but I heard that can kind of change the texture a little bit. But my favorite method is just to use a cheese grater. This creates little shavings of clay that make it much more easier to use. You want to start off by building up a mass of clay. I think it's a little bit too round for what I'm looking for. I want to make the head a little bit longer. Anytime you're doing a sculpture, you want to make sure you're always turning the entire piece. Okay, now that I have a rough basic shape, I want to decide where the mouth is going to be. So let me kind of draw a line about where I think I want it. Try to make it as straight as I can. About like that. And I'll use these wire cutters to cut into it further. I'll cut out the bottom part of the mouth. So now it should come out like a watermelon slice. So if you're following along at home, you can decide how big or how small you want this mouth to be, or how high or how low, whatever you want. Okay, I'm liking how it's coming out, but I think I want to give it a little less of a chin. So I'm going to scrape away some of that clay. Once you're pretty happy with the sculpture, you want to smooth it out the best you can, but it does not have to be perfect. Okay, so now we have our quick basic sculpture, nothing fancy at all. And it's not even on both sides, if you do notice. That actually doesn't matter, because I'm going to pick the side that I like the most, and then we're just going to make a pattern of one side, and then we're just going to mirror that for the other side of the puppet. So the next step is using masking tape. And what you're going to want to do is rip off little tiny pieces of the masking tape, and you're just going to kind of almost decoupage it on. You want to make sure that you are overlapping these pieces, and you cover the entire half of the head. The reason why you want to use small pieces is so you don't get wrinkles. You do get little wrinkles, it's not a big deal, but you do want to avoid them. Now as you're covering this, you want to make sure you have about 2 or 3 layers of tape across the entire surface. Alright, so now I've covered half of this sculpture. Now let's make the center line. Decide where about the middle is. I'll say right about there. And then I'll do it under the chin too. Continue down to about there. Let me trim that with the X-Acto blade. So now it's in half exactly how I want it. The next step is to draw some darts. Now this is a common question I get. Where to draw those lines. The more often you use this technique, the easier it'll be to find out where those lines need to go. It also depends on how detailed you want this to be. For a pattern like this, I like to keep it pretty simple. So I'm going to put a dart coming right from the top of the head, down about to there, kind of like that. And I'll put one under the chin over here. And I'll put one right about there. And now that we have those lines, let's cut those with the X-Acto blade as well. Now that we've cut on those lines, let's carefully peel this off without hurting the sculpture. And there's our pattern. Now that we have our tape pattern, let's transfer it to a piece of paper. Now I'm going to take this tape pattern and stick it as flat as I can to the paper. I think I'm actually not going to end up using that dart, but we'll see. Now what I'm going to do is trace this with my pen. Now that I have this pattern, I'm going to smooth it out a little bit by hand. Once I laid this flat, I realized this dart wasn't really doing much, so I took it out. Now we've traced our pattern, but it's too small, so I have to decide how large I want to blow it up to. Now I think I want it a little bit smaller than Ivan's head here, so let me start off by measuring that. Head's about, with an open mouth, 10 inches, which is a huge head, a little too big. I think I want this head to be, it's a little bit more round, maybe about, I'm thinking about 7 inches tall. And this clay head right now is 4 inches. So we just have to do a little bit of math. So 7 times 100 divided by 4, and that's x is equal to 175%. Boom. So now I know I have to blow this up to 175%. Let's go do it. Okay, here it is. I'm about to put it into the printer at 175%. Now, put it in just like that. Hit the button. You can see the size. Now let's go back to the shop. So now we have our pattern blown up to a bigger size, but now I think I want to make a little change. So my goal in this video is to make a very easy generic puppet pattern. So I decided to make it a little bit more simple. I actually want to get rid of this dart, so I'll show you how to do that. Start off by cutting out the pattern. I'm going to cut straight up from that dart to cut this into a separate piece. So now I'll just kind of slowly push it in like that. Now that's a little closer to what I'm looking for. Use some spray adhesive and glue it down to the craft paper. For a puppet this size, I like to use 1/2 inch foam. You can use the green foam from craft stores, but this is my favorite. This is reticulated foam, also known as dry fast foam. I ordered this from foamonline.com. I order a rectangle with a 1/2 inch width and a 24 inch length and height. That creates a nice sheet. So now let's trace out this pattern. Try to get as close to the edges as you can to save the foam. To cut it out, a lot of people like to use a razor, but since this foam is only 1/2 inch wide, scissors work fine. I'm going to put this together with the contact cement. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area when doing this. And it's always a good idea to have gloves on. You don't need to put glue inside this area where the mouth is, or inside where the neck hole is. The glue only goes on this edge, these edges, and the inside dart. Alright, it's pretty tacky. Now let's attach this together. So here we have our puppet head assembled. Now one thing I am noticing is in blowing up the proportions, the neck hole is too small, so I'm just going to make that a little bit larger and then transfer that to my pattern. There we have it, a nice little puppet head. Next, let's make the mouth plate. To find the size of the mouth plate, I'll slide this paper into the mouth of my puppet and then just trace it. And there I have a mouth. One thing I want to do is make sure it's symmetrical though, so I'll line up these edges to find the center. Now I want to trace this pattern twice to create the fabric mouth plate. And on the mouth plate itself, I want to trim off about 1/2 inch. Now we have our fabric mouth pattern and our mouth plate pattern. On the mouth plate for a pattern this size, I like to use the plastic from a storage container. There it is. Next, I like to sand the edges a little bit so that the glue sticks better. Now there's a couple different ways people like to put the mouth plate in. Some people put it in straight against the edge like this at a 90-degree angle. What I actually like to do is to fold it around. So I actually put the mouth inside, on the inside edge like this, and then curl it around, just like that, to the inside. That gives you a little bit more surface area inside the mouth. And I'll do the same thing on the bottom. It's kind of an awkward thing to do. And there we have a simple puppet head and pattern made from scratch. Now this new head pattern is available on my website, but I do encourage you to try to make your own pattern. This was an example of pattern making with a very simple form. If you have more details in your sculpture, you're going to have to make a lot more pieces and darts in your pattern. And there are also a bunch of other ways to do this. I've seen people use tinfoil, duct tape, and even liquid latex. And the best method is the one that you're most comfortable with. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to make the fabric covering. It'll look like this.
So a lot of people ask me, why bother making a fleece covering? Why not just use the foam covering twice? And the reason why is kind of interesting. It's the same reason why there's a different pattern for a t-shirt than there is for a jacket. You would never wear a t-shirt over a jacket, but you could always wear a jacket over a t-shirt. One is designed to go over the other if you just use the foam pattern, you might be able to squeeze it on, but it's not designed for it. You want something that's really made especially for that shape. So that's kind of the idea of why you make a separate pattern. You would never wear a t-shirt over a jacket, but you could always wear a jacket over a t-shirt. So that's kind of the idea of why you make a separate pattern. When you think about it, it's obvious.
Now to make the fabric covering, you're gonna need some scrap fabric. I like to use an inexpensive fleece. Now the color doesn't matter for this because we're just using it to make the pattern. Now when you use a piece of fleece, there's two directions that it has. One direction has a lot of stretch to it, and the other direction has a lot less stretch. We wanna use it this way with the stretch going across. So I find the center seam on the puppet, and I wanna lay this piece of fabric right over the middle of it, okay? And wrap it around. Now in the back, I want to make sure that I pin this to the back center seam to make it even. Now what you could do, and what I used to do in the past, is only drape half of the pattern and then just copy it for the other side, but I try to make this pattern one piece if I can. Now the back seam of the fabric follows the back seam of the foam. Okay, just going to trim some of the scraps so you can see a little better. So you can see right down the center is the back seam. Now in the front, looks like I'm not really going to have too much of a front seam, which is going to be nice. Next I want to find the darts on the top of the head. So I'm just going to gently pinch up here, and you'll notice the fabric kind of naturally wants to fold in certain places. So it's best to go where it naturally wants to go. I would say the overall goal in this is to make sure your fabric is laying as flat against the foam as it can possibly be. Got some pins there. Looks like I'm going to have a small dart in the front, but it does not need to go all the way down. Now just to make this more clear, I'm going to mark the front so we can remember where our front is. So that's our front. Now I can feel here the edge of the top of the mouth. So what I'm going to do is just kind of trace where that edge is. This will make it a little easier for me to follow along. Just so you know, these are not our final lines that we're making. It's just to help guide us through. Okay. So now I know I can make a little cut underneath here to open it up for the mouth. And I'll cut up the middle. So now I can start to drape the chin with this scrap. So again, for the chin, you really want to make sure that it's pulled evenly and flat over the foam, just like that. Pin that in. Let me bring this down here. Might be a little easier to see. So here we are so far. This is the front. Here's the back where the entrance hole is going to be for inside. And here's the mouth. So what I need to do now is have this chin lay a little flatter. So let me first start by finding the center line. So I can see there's my center line of the chin of the foam. So I'm going to bring this seam right together there and pin along that line. You want to make this as symmetrical as you can get it, but if it's not perfect, we can fix that later. So right now the puppet head is completely covered with the fleece. The next thing I'm going to do is trace around all the seams with the Sharpie. I'm going to start up at the top of the head, and right at that point, trace along the edge of these darts. Now when you make this one, you can kind of feel where that edge is and draw it where you want it. Try to match it up on this half too. Okay. And then I'll do the same for the top, kind of making a new line. This first one was pretty close though. And now the entrance hole, the neck entrance. I'll trace around the edge of the foam. Now we have our lines all traced out. Let's open it up and see what we get. Take these pins out. We can put the head aside for now. Let's see what we have. That looks pretty nice. Now normally to convert the pattern to paper, I would use a tracing wheel and some other tools and techniques to make sure it's very precise. But the point of this video is to make it a little bit more accessible to people who might be trying this technique for the first time. So I'm only going to use some of the tools we've been using in the past videos. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay out some craft paper and spray it with some Super 77 spray adhesive. You just want a light coat because this is not going to be a permanent bond. Next, carefully lay out the pattern without stretching it or having any wrinkles. Then cut it out with old scissors that you don't mind getting glue on. Then carefully pull off the fabric. So here's our pattern. Now it's not perfectly symmetrical. You see if I fold it in half, there's some overlapping in some places. So you could use this pattern as is, but I highly recommend truing it up. That's making it perfectly symmetrical on both sides. And I'll show you exactly how to do that. So what I'm going to do is trace this onto a white piece of paper. I would normally use pencil, but it doesn't show up very well on the camera, so I'm going to use Sharpie today. There you go. Now the next thing you want to do is flip it over, then trace it again. I like to line up the center dart here, and then make sure the mouth is parallel. And then trace it again. You can see off the bat that doesn't line up perfectly, but we're going to trace it again. There we go. We have it traced twice. So now you can see we have two sets of lines going all the way around. Now the truth is actually right in the middle. So what I'm going to do is carefully draw in between these lines. Anywhere where they cross, like right here, that's the center. So I'm going to draw a line. I'm using an orange pencil so you can hopefully see it a little better. With the orange, I'm drawing in between those lines. Now I'm going to carefully cut it out right on the orange line. Now I just retraced this onto another piece of paper so I don't have these confusing lines on it. So now we have our finished, completed, perfectly symmetrical pattern. So now it's time to cut it out of the fabric. If you want to, you can use this pattern that we made, or if you want to download it, I have this on my website, which is, you have to blow this up to 200% to make it the right size. You can do that at any local printer. Or if you want to use your regular printer, I have this one, which is half of it, and it has to be divided onto two sheets. You have to put it back together again. I'm going to use this for today. The type of fleece I want to use for the final puppet is a nylon fleece. A lot of people call it Antron fleece. Now this fleece also stretches more one way. You want to make sure you're putting the length along the side that has the most stretch. Any edges you want to machine stitch on this pattern, you have to add a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Okay, so right now my stretch is going across this way. So I want to lay out my pattern. So let me start off by tracing this pattern. line it up right there in the middle again. Now I like to machine stitch the inside of the mouth, so I'm going to add a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Then carefully cut it out. So now we have our fleece covering all cut out. Let's stitch it together. Alright, now this is mostly sewn up. If you can see, in the back of the head, I left maybe about 4 inches unsewn. That will make it easier for me to sew the neck on. Speaking of which, we have to make a pattern for the neck. So I'm going to fit this over the foam skull just so we can make the pattern for the neck. I'm not permanently putting it on now. Just making sure everything lines up. Okay. Now to make the neck pattern, I really want this to follow the contour of the head. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do it backward. I find the center and I'll pin it straight to the back. And that actually is sitting nice and straight. That's how you want it. So let me mark that. Here's my center back. And I'll mark my center front. And that goes straight down. And that'll go straight down too. Alright, let's see what we have. So I'm going to transfer this neck pattern to the paper. I'm going to start off by folding this paper in half. And I have the crease on this side. So what I want to do is find the center of the neck. Now here's my neck. And this low part is the center. So let me trim that quick. And then let me trim the back of the neck. So again, this is the crease. And we want that to be in the front. So now I'm going to carefully trace around this. Now it's a little jagged. I'm going to smooth that out a bit. And then I'll trace here. Now when I cut this out and open it up, I have a perfect neck pattern. Now I'm going to cut the neck pattern out of the fleece. So again, my stretch is going this way. I'm going to lay this down. Make sure you mark the center on the top and bottom, and then I'll trace it out. So here's my headpiece again, inside out. And what I want to do, see, by leaving these sides open, it makes it much easier to sew this. So. Alright, I just finished stitching up that neck. So this is pretty much all together. Now what I'm going to do is cut out the fabric mouth plate. Now the fabric mouth plate, I like to use velvet, but you could also use felt. So if the fabric for your mouth plate has some stretch to it, make sure the stretch is going this way. You can see that this velvet has a lot of stretch this way and almost none that way. So we have it going just like this, and then trace this out. If you're wondering where this pattern came from, it was from the last video, from the foam head. There it is. Now I'm going to pin it to the inside of the mouth. Make sure to line up the notches with the center front. So I just pinned the fabric mouth plate to the inside. Now if you remember, I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance to the inside of the mouth of the green fabric. That's because I like to machine stitch this part of the puppet in. Let's do that right now. Okay, we have all the pieces assembled. The mouth plate is sewn in, and I even did a stitch partially down the neck from about here to the end, leaving this hole open. This is going to allow me to turn the puppet inside out. So let's glue it in. I like to use contact cement for this. I only put glue on the seam allowance of the fabric mouth plate. Then I'll also put glue around the rim of the mouth of the foam head too. And now I'm actually not going to wait to attach it. This is called doing a wet fit. This will allow you to slide the mouth around to make sure it's in the perfect spot. Okay, now I attach the mouth plate all the way around. It's not completely dry yet, and I want to turn the whole thing before it's completely dry, just in case it's not perfectly set. Then I can still slide things around a little bit. So here we go. The way I do it is I actually put my hand in the puppet like I'm going to be performing it. I reach into this hole and I slowly just start to wrap it around. And I can take it out and kind of scrunch that head through that hole. Check for the wrinkles. Hey guys, I'm just launching this awesome project called Camp Puppet. Camp Puppet is a week-long immersive virtual puppetry camp for kids 8 to 12 years old. During the course of the week, kids are going to learn the ins and outs of puppetry from the comfort of their very own home. And each camper is going to design their very own puppet using the Camp Puppet kit. Everything you need to design your own puppet is inside this kit. And best of all, there's no sewing required. The kit comes with a pre-sewn snoof puppet body, 2 sets of painted dome eyes, multiple options of stick-on pupils, and some additional designing materials like swatches of Antron fleece and different colors of fur. It also comes with a small piece of foam that you can use to make horns or a nose. Some of the tools included are a low-temp hot glue gun, hot glue sticks, and scissors. It also comes with the Kruininger Puppet Guide to Puppetry pocket book. This book is a guide that teaches you all the tips and tricks of puppetry and how to play like a pro. It also comes with some Kruininger Puppet button flair and my puppet cards. And lastly, it comes with an extra printed copy of the snoof pattern with illustrated instructions. That way you can make your puppet some friends too. This camp runs for 5 days, from July 27th to July 31st. Each day is a 2-hour intensive covering a different topic. In the first session, kids are going to learn how to make a puppet look funny through design choices. During this session, kids will design their own unique puppet. On day 2, kids will learn the basics of puppetry, and not just the basic skills of lip sync, but how to really bring their puppet to life. On day 3, we will explore the mind of our puppet characters to find out what type of personality they're going to have through a bunch of fun improv games. On day 4, we're going to learn how to make a puppet show. In this session, kids will learn how to create a story arc. We will use our new puppet characters to create short, funny skits that will have a distinct beginning, middle, and end. And day 5 is showtime. The last session is our puppet party, complete with puppet commentary and reactions, plus there'll be a special puppet guest MC. Visit camppuppet.com for specific details. And I have a special offer for my YouTube viewers. You can save $126 if you sign up before July 15th. After that, the price goes up, and the last day of late registration is July 20th. I know that's kind of soon, but I need time to mail the puppet kits. But don't wait, because there's only spots for 16 campers. It was important for me to have a small class size so we can really get a lot done, and a lot of one-on-one training and attention. Maybe your kid's already interested in puppetry, this would be perfect for them. And especially if they're not interested in puppetry, this is a great introduction class. And there's so much a young person can gain from learning puppetry. Especially if you have a child who's kind of shy, this is a great way they can literally create a voice for themselves. Because they don't feel like it's them talking, and it can really help them come out of their shell. Plus, it's a lot of fun. And not only that, but with the skills that they'll learn in this class, they can create hours of entertainment for themselves. So even though we have 2-hour-long sessions per day, they could use that puppet and practice and entertain themselves for the rest of the whole day, or even for the rest of the summer. And I can't think of a better way to spend your summer than writing and creating a puppet show. Maybe one day they'll start their own puppet show on YouTube, and I'll have tips for them on how to do that too. Anyway, thanks for checking this out. Please make sure you share this video with anyone that you think might be interested. Thanks so much for checking it out, and I'll see you guys at camp. Just like this. Now there are a ton of different styles of puppet bodies. In this video, I'm going to show you a simple method to make a body for this puppet that we've already started. If you need to make a body that has a very specific shape, you can actually use the same pattern making technique that we used to make the head for this character. You can link to that video right here. The pattern making technique we're going to use today is drafting. So we're going to draw it out on a piece of paper. Start off making a vertical line, and we need to mark it at about 11 inches. And I'm going to make long horizontal lines at each mark. Then I'm going to measure out 4 inches from each side and mark it on the top and bottom. And then connect those lines. And then draw a line 2 inches from the top line. And this one I want to mark 5 inches from the center line on both sides. So just to be clear, this line should be 10 inches from this point to this point, 8 inches from here to here on the top and bottom, and 11 inches tall. Now I'm going to connect these with diagonal lines. And that's pretty much our pattern. I'm just going to smooth out some of these edges and then cut out around this edge. And there's our puppet body pattern. So this is our puppet body pattern. It's a pretty basic shape. I'm going to show you how to put it together now. If you have a printer at home, you can actually print this pattern out from my website like this. When you print it out, it comes in 2 pieces and you have to glue it together on the dotted line. The foam we used for the head is only 1/2 inch thick. But for this body pattern, I found that a 1 inch thickness works best. I order my foam from foamonline.com, and I use the dry fast foam and a medium firmness. You must be in a well-ventilated area when using contact cement. It's a good idea to wear gloves too. Now we're going to take our body pattern and trace it out on the foam. For 1/2 inch foam, I usually use scissors, but once you get thicker than that, it's good to use a razor blade. But be careful. Using a razor blade helps you get clean edges. It's also a little faster. Okay, now that we have these pieces all cut out, let's glue them together. To glue them, I use a contact cement. A lot of puppeteers use barge, but I can get this locally, so Masters is what I use. The glue goes around these 3 edges. You don't have to put it on the bottom. Go ahead and evenly spread the glue around the edges. After gluing, wait about 10 minutes for it to get tacky. I like to start off by pressing them together this way. Make sure they're nice and even and firmly press them in so you have a nice good bond. And I'll turn it over to the side here and line up those bottom 2 edges. And then I'll line up these bottom edges. Okay? So right now it's looking like this. And you want to evenly press this together all the way around. And there we have our foam body. Now let's cover it with fleece. So the fleece we're going to use is a nylon fleece. A lot of people call it Antron fleece. Now this fleece has a lot of stretch one way and a lot less stretch the other way. We want to use it the way with the stretch. So I'm going to lay the fabric out, but I'm actually going to fold it over so it's doubled up. That way I only need to trace the pattern once. I'll lay the pattern out and trace around it. So I'm going to stitch this on the sewing machine. Because I'm stitching it on the sewing machine, I don't need to cut it out yet. It's easier to cut it out after. Alright, it's all stitched up. So I just stitched around this edge and I left a small amount of seam allowance all the way around. Now I'm going to cut around it. Don't cut too close to your stitch line. Now let's draw a neck hole on this body. Let me bring it in a little closer. Now when you draw the neck hole, you want to make it about 3 inches down from the center, which is probably about right there. Okay? See that? And now I'm going to make the neck hole about the size of the neck of our puppet that we made last week. If you look here, it's more on the front than it is in the back. Almost like the neck hole of a t-shirt. Now we're going to cut that out. So just like that, our neck hole is now cut out, and it's starting to look more like a puppet we'd be able to perform. So now let's put the fleece cover over it. Once it's covered, you can kind of feel where that neck hole is. And you want to make little cuts around it so you can put your hand through. Now what you want to do is take this edge and tuck it inside the neck and then glue it to the inside of the foam. You could use hot glue for this, but I like to use fabric tack. You'll want to glue the inside of the bottom too. Make sure you have the front of your puppet, not the back. You can tell because the neck hole on the front side is a little lower. Choose a neck length that you feel works for your character, and then pin it in. I think that works pretty well for this guy. Let's stitch it in.
Come see my art show. It's going to be an amazing exhibition at Damon College in Buffalo, New York, with a bunch of puppets and paintings on display. And I'll be there too, as well as a bunch of other puppet people.
Today I'm going to show you how to mold and cast eyes that look kind of like this. So I know I made a video on making eyes a couple weeks ago. We used things like spoons and ping pong balls. If you want to see that, click right here. And those kinds of materials are fine if you're a beginner or if you're doing this as a craft. But for solid eyes that will last a long time, I like to cast them like this. The other thing I love about these eyes is that they're completely solid. Using spoons and ping pong balls make your eyes hollow, which makes them much more fragile and harder to attach. With a solid eye, you have a lot more surface area for gluing. But in order to cast these, we have to make a mold of something. I ordered these mixing spoons online, and I think they would make the perfect eyes. Now, there's no reason why you can't cut these off, sand them down, paint them, and use them as eyes yourself. But if you go through this process of making a mold, it makes making eyes so much faster. If you want to use the same ones as me, I have a link down in the description. So to start off, we're going to cut off the handles. To do that, I'm going to use a Dremel. Make sure you use eye protection to cover up your eyes. And I also have a mask. I don't want to get little bits of plastic in my lungs, so I'd like to keep it on, please. So I just cut off the first handle, and as you can see, it came off pretty well, but it's definitely got an edge that I don't want on there. So I'm going to sand that down until it's nice and smooth. So I just sanded the last of that handle all the way off. So now the trouble is the rest of the spoon has a nice polished finish, and this has a sanded finish. So to solve that, I'm going to sand the whole thing. I actually personally like having a matte finish to my eyes rather than a glossy finish. Especially if you're doing puppetry for film, the reflection of the lighting can be distracting. Having a matte finish helps minimize that reflection. So I'm going to sand the whole thing down. But make sure you use a fine grit. Anything over 120 should be fine. So there's one down. Now we have to repeat this process for the rest of the spoons. So now they're all cut and sanded, and I also gave them a light coat of spray paint. That helps to fill some of the small gaps from the sanding. Now it's time to make a mold. Today we're going to make a simple dump mold. Start off by gluing these down to the base. You want to keep at least a ½ inch of space between all the pieces. Doesn't need to be perfect, but it's nice to make it look pretty. So now we're going to build up the walls for our mold. Now when you're gluing the walls for the mold on, make sure you get a good seal. It's important to avoid leaks. This is the Mold Max 30. First I pour in part A. This has to be mixed at a 10:1 ratio. And then part B. If you want to use something a little bit easier, I recommend the Umu 30. It's a 1:1 ratio. so you mix both parts evenly. Much easier. I just didn't have enough. Now let's mix the silicone. It's so important to mix it evenly. If it's not mixed perfect, it's not gonna work. All right, now it's time to pour it in. Let me just get this drill out and I'll let it drip in. And I'll slowly pour this in. So now we just have to let this sit for 24 hours. And I don't have to worry about cleaning any of these tools because when the silicone cures, it peels right off. See you in 24 hours. It's been 24 hours, so let's check this out. And actually, like I showed you before, the cleanup is very easy. This silicone just peels right off. So you don't need to wash any of your tools or anything at all, which is awesome. Let's put that aside and let's bust this open. Got some of these stuck in there, so let's pull those out quick. And there we have our mold. Now, some of the main benefits to using this process. First of all, this mold is gonna last you a very long time. It is a little bit of a process to make it the first time, but it's gonna last you for many, many years. And once you have one mold, you can make multiple castings in just a couple minutes. Let's test it out. Now for casting, we're gonna use Smooth Cast 300. What's nice about this is it's really easy. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, so you mix the two parts evenly. Also, it comes out white, so you don't have to paint it if you don't want to. Though I do paint mine anyway, and I do recommend it. One thing that's really nice about having multiple sets of eyes in this mold is, let's say you want to cast the biggest eyes, but you accidentally make a little bit too much resin. You can take the leftover resin and pour it into another one of the molds so you don't waste the material. Pour some of part A. Then I'll put part B into this one. Fill them up evenly. And then I'll pour them together into this large cup. Now you don't have a lot of working time, so you gotta stir it quickly and then make sure you get it into your molds. I can feel it heating up already. Look at that, I have tons of extra, so I'll pour some in here. Make a couple sets of eyes. Alright, so let's get a close-up look. You'll watch it cure right before your eyes. Alright, they're all cured. Let's see how they came out. Wow. Holy cow. That looks perfect. Wow. Holy cow. Could not ask for a better pair of eyes. Look at these. They're so matte. They're perfect. Now before attaching these eyes, I like to sand the back flat. That makes it even easier to attach. I do that by setting the sandpaper on the table and then sanding it flat. They come out real nice. We're going to attach these eyes and the rest of his features in the next video. If you have trouble finding any of these materials, all the links are in the description below. Today we're going to learn how to make eyelids by covering these eyes that we made in the last video with fleece. In the last video, we learned how to cast these eyes out of plastic. Click here if you'd like to see that video. Now, making these types of eyelids is not difficult. The only tricky thing about it is getting both eyes perfectly symmetrical. And I came up with a little trick for doing it perfect every single time. First way is with a drawing compass. It's important to get a decent one. The cheap ones will slide open when you don't want them to. What's nice about this one is it doesn't use pressure to hold it shut. It uses this little screw. That's the kind you want. To do this trick, I use a piece of paper. Normally I use white, but I found in the video you couldn't see the eyes on it, so I'm using orange today. So I start off by putting the eye about there, and then I trace a circle around it, close to the edge. Then I'm going to make a dot right about there in the paper. In this case, it's about an inch down from the circle. But you'll want to do more or less depending on if you want the eyes more shut or open. And all I do is put the one end on the dot and then gently drag the compass over the eye. But now that this is set up, all I have to do is place the next eye there and repeat the same motions to get it to be perfectly identical. Now I know the pencil lines are a little bit difficult to see with the camera, but if you can see, they are perfectly symmetrical. Another way is by using a flexible ruler. What's nice about this is you can bend it to the contour of the eye and then trace around it. Now we're going to cover our eyelids with fleece. A lot of people call it Antron fleece, but it's actually nylon fleece. You can link to them down in the description. Now making eyelids is a great usage for small scrap pieces of fleece. I'm going to do these top ones green. And I'll start off just by spraying the back of these with spray adhesive. Make sure to let them dry for about 5 minutes. Then go ahead and stretch them over the eye, right across the line. I'll do the same for the other eyes. Now we're going to let these sit for a little bit while we work on the thin strip that goes below the eye. Now to make the eyeliner, I'm going to use some dark colored felt. In this case I have black and brown. And you only need a tiny strip, but it's very important to make it perfectly straight. To do that I use a rotary cutter and a straight edge. So I decide about how thick I want it to be. And then I cut it right there. I'll do the same with the brown. Press down on the ruler firmly. There's one. Now make sure these are lying flat, but don't pull on them. And then spritz them with a little bit of glue. I'll gently just snip them in half. Now that we have these, let's see how they look on the eyes. I think I want to try the black ones on this green. So I'll gently lay it right below, just like that. I'll do the same here. And I'll do the brown on these ones. So now these eyes are all covered, now I'm going to carefully trim the edges with a razor blade. Do this slowly from the back and just gently glide the blade around the edge and it'll trim it right off. It's a little tricky because of the glue, but just be patient and go slowly. You can even use old scissors if you don't mind getting glue on them. Look how much expression you can get out of these eyes just by turning them. Click right here if you want to see how to put pupils on these eyes. Today I'm going to show you how to make a simple hairdo for your puppet using fur that looks kind of like this. Now there are a ton of different ways that you can make hair. You can use fur, which is what we're gonna do today, but people use feathers. You can even use a real wig. Now let's get started. The process for making the pattern for the hair is pretty much the same as the one that we used to make the fleece cover for this puppet. So we're gonna use a scrap piece of fleece to drape it on top of his head. The first thing you have to decide on your own is what kind of hairline you want him to have. He could have a receding hairline. He could be bald on top with just hair going around the sides. You could have it come down like this for like a Dracula look. Anything you want. I'm gonna use a pin to mark where I want the top of the hairline to be. So I want it to be about right here for this guy. So I'll put a pin right there. And I'll mark the side too. So I want it to come down to about there. That'll help guide me while I'm draping. What I'm trying to do is to lay this fleece flat against the puppet. Okay. I'm going to trim out what I don't need here. Made this piece a little too long. Okay, now it's laying down pretty flat. So what I'm going to do is draw the hairline that I want. So I have my pin. I can feel my pin right there. So I'm going to make a little dot where my pins are, so I know where to draw to. So I'm going to bring it down like this. Have it come down to there. I think I'm going to give him little sideburns there. So I'll probably end up putting my ear right about there. Depending on the design of the character, you might want to put the ears on first. It really depends on how important that ear placement is to the character that you designed. I'll have it come down like this. Down the back of the head. Okay, so I have my hairline drawn along the side of the puppet. Now I'm going to draw in the darts. Or the dart rather, there's only one, on top of the head. And I have to make the center seams. So I just follow along the seams that are already on the top of the puppet's head. Now let me take these pins out and see what we have. So there we have our pattern. Now let's quickly transfer it to paper. And this is the same process that we've used before. I tack down the fabric to the paper, then cut it out with old scissors that you don't mind getting gummed up with the glue. Peel off the fabric and then you're done. Now for his hair today, I chose to go with orange. This is a long pile fur, about 3 inches long. Now anytime you cut pattern pieces out of fur, you have to keep in mind the fur direction, also known as the nap. Most people have the nap going down, but it truly doesn't make much of a difference as long as you are consistent. And actually for this guy's hair, I want the nap to be going up. So I'm going to keep that in mind when cutting it out. I'm going to lay it out and trace it right about here. Make sure you put it at the same angle when you flip it. And then carefully cut it out with a razor blade. I like to keep about 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance all the way around. It's best to cut the fur from the back with a razor blade. Using scissors can make the fur length uneven around the edges. Next, I'm going to sew up both darts and then along the top seam. So now I'm going to stitch it up. You could do this by hand, but I'm going to stitch it up on the machine quick. So now I have to stitch the headpiece onto our puppet. Now just as a warning, this is not going to look good when I stitch it on. It's not going to look nice until we comb it out and trim it. Okay, so I'm going to put this hair on the puppet, and one thing I did was I left in those 2 pins as place marks for where I need to put the front of the hair piece. So let me place this on right where it was on this side, and then hopefully the other side will line up as well. And then I'll start pinning it down so it doesn't move. So that's lined up there. That's lined up on that side. Let me check this side. It should all lie flat and even, so it really shouldn't take too much finesse. Let me check this side. That looks about right. A little bit of measuring with my fingers. Okay. And that looks pretty good. So the type of stitch we're going to do is a slip stitch. What's nice about that is it closes in both edges of fabric and it doesn't show the thread. So let me get you in closer here so you can see a little better. Okay. So I knotted my thread to the fur there, and I'm going to go in and out, just catching the fleece on that side, and then do the same thing on the top here of the edge of the fur, going in and out of the top. Don't go straight through. And then making sure you just go evenly across all the way. Alright, and there it is, all stitched on. Here's how he's looking so far, all the way around. Now, watch how much a quick comb can make a difference. So that already, you know, without any trimming at all, makes it look like, you know, a character for sure. Now this hair, as it is, will not keep its shape. There are some other things we can do to it to make it keep its shape, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But already it looks kind of neat, that Jimmy Neutron-like look. But if I show you, if I shake his head around, you know, it gets bedhead. Which again, it can be another nice look if you want it. But let's do some trimming. Now I don't actually cut hair in real life, but while I've gotten my own haircut, I pay attention and look at some of the techniques that they're using and apply it to what I do to these characters. So I've noticed them pull through their fingers and start trimming that way. And here we have a basic little hairdo. I'll show you how it looks all the way around. So I trimmed it short all the way on the edges. I left it long on top. I did trim a little bit off the top. I think that gives it a more natural look because the fur can be slightly different lengths. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. So you could just leave it like this. So if the character needed to keep its hair messy, it could easily get messed up, but also easily straighten it back out just by running your hand through it. But if you want to keep it a little bit more solid, you can put some product in it. Now, I do not recommend putting any real hair care product in your puppet. There's a few different techniques for styling the hair I've come up with over the years. So instead of using hairspray, I have used lacquer to get the same kind of effect to hold the hair. But if you want something a little bit more solid, like gel, I recommend using Elmer's glue. Now, it might seem kind of strange, but what's awesome about the Elmer's glue is it's not something that's gonna flake out like a natural gel will. But the best part about this is that it will hold its shape pretty much forever. But since Elmer's glue is water soluble, you can just use a little water to rework it anytime you want. People actually use Elmer's glue in their hair. You ever see people with those real long spikes? A lot of times this is what it is. But you want to start off with water. Just wetting down the hair. I'm just dipping my hand into a little bowl of water here to kind of work it in. You don't want it to be soaking wet. You just want it to be kind of damp. And do this anywhere where you want the gel to be, or the glue rather. Then, add the glue. Now how much should you use? I use about the same amount I would actually use in my real hair if I was using gel. About that much if it helps. Again, it's just Elmer's glue. It's all non-toxic. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt your puppet at all either. And you just kind of start off by really working it in. You want it down toward the roots of the hair so it can hold its shape a little better. Now where it's short, you might not need to put any of the gel, but sometimes it's nice. Holds the shape, kind of gives it a nice even sheen over it. Actually, I'll put a little more glue in. Whoop. Don't do that. I'll put a little more glue in. So it looks pretty good, and now let's start styling it with a comb. After I comb it, I gently kind of pat it down. That keeps any little stray hairs from sticking out and drying that way. But again, even if it's dry, you can rework it if you need to. And now even after you style it, you can of course always go back and do any little trimmings of any stray hairs you see that might be uneven. There you have a nice little fancy hairdo. And we're going to be finishing this guy up over the next 2 or 3 videos. So stay tuned, there's a lot more coming. Also, I have to say, I really appreciate all the feedback I've been getting. Most of it has been very positive. And if you know any other techniques for making hair, please leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It helps out the channel. See you next time. I've had a ton of puppet makers reach out to me and ask that I bring back the live puppet building workshop from last year. And now the Puppet Makers Workshop is back again, with a brand new penguin puppet build. And last year, Puppet Makers Workshop sold out completely, so don't wait. This workshop is a total of 10 hours of instruction for 2 hours a day for 5 days. And in that time, we're gonna cover everything. From pattern prep and laying out the pieces, to gluing foam, sewing, and assembling the entire puppet. And all the finishing touches that really bring your character to life. And this year, we have new and improved puppet building kits you need to make a professional level puppet. You'll get beautiful, professionally dyed Nyla fleece, pro-grade reticulated foam, pre-made professional arm rods, and much more. And my favorite thing about these kits is every single tool you need comes inside the box. So there's nothing else you need to have. And every kit comes with a free copy of the penguin puppet pattern that was made especially for this course. This deal is only limited to 16 people. We wanted to have a really small class size so we could focus a lot more with one-on-one attention. This makes for a much more positive puppet building experience. So be sure to check out puppetmakersworkshop.com to register now. Now you might be wondering if this workshop is right for you. It is open to anybody and all levels of puppet builders are welcome. But this class is really designed for anyone who has been hesitant about making a professional style puppet all by themselves. And because of the live virtual instruction, I'll be with you the entire time. You'll be following along step by step, able to ask any questions that you have. These can be building questions, questions about puppetry, or even if you have questions about starting your own YouTube channel. We've built in a little time for Q&A to cover that and any other questions you might have. Well, that's it for now, and I hope to see you at the Puppet Makers Workshop. Today we're going to be putting the facial features on our puppet. Any of these features that we make can be tweaked to your own design. You can make eyes or ears bigger or smaller, whatever you want for your character. This is just one example. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. The first thing we're gonna do is put his nose on. About a month ago, I made 2 separate videos on how to make noses. One of them was like this and used a vacuum former to make different types of noses. And the other video was this one, which shows how to make a larger nose that I think is better for most monster characters or bigger puppets in general. That nose is a little too big for this guy. So I'm going to show you one more really quick technique for making a very simple nose. Some puppets use a contrasting color for the nose. I'm going to have this one match the rest of his body. I'm going to take a scrap of foam and cut off a piece about the size of the nose that I want to make. And then I'll start trimming it down and shaping it. The next thing I do is I take this foam shape I put it face down in the center of a small scrap of fleece, the same color that you want the nose. Now I'm going to carefully wrap it around while marking the edges. Depending on the shape of your nose, you should be left with a circle or an oval shape. Connect those lines. Next, I'm going to take a needle and thread and loosely do a running stitch all the way around the circumference of the circle. Make sure you leave both ends of the thread out. If you pull on both of those ends, it'll start to gather the circle, forming a little pouch. Take your piece of foam and put it straight down into the center and gently pull tight. And then I use the rest of the thread to stitch it closed. And there we have a perfect little nose. I like to put the nose on first because it's easier to get into the center. Then it's simple to position the eyes and other features around that symmetrically. So we start off by finding about the center and pinning it on where I think I want it. Now the nose placement can heavily affect the way this character looks. That looks good to me. Now I'm going to stitch it on. To stitch this on, I use a ladder stitch. Some people also call it a slip stitch. One more quick tip. Anytime you knot the thread, you don't want to trim the thread really close to the knot. You must leave a long tail. That'll keep it from coming undone. So this is how you hide the tail inside the puppet. You go back in the same hole that you just came in after you knot it, push it through, across to the other side. There we go. I'll pull that through. Now pull that kind of tight. Then I trim it, and then the thread gets sucked back in. And there we have a nice little nose. Now let's make some ears. Start off just by drawing a simple pattern. I want mine about that long. And let's see how just a simple ear like that looks. Now this might be a little big for him, but let's see how that looks. Here we go. I think I'm going to go with that. I'll take a little bit more off the top. There we go. Yep, I think I'm gonna go with that shape. Now inside the foam, I like to use the stabilizer fabric. It's almost like a thin headliner. It's used for stiffening fabric purses and sometimes in structure for costumes. I have a link to this down in the description. But you could use foam or felt as well. So I cut 4 squares of fabric, each that can fit the shape of the ear. Next, I sandwich them together face to face. Then I trace the shape of the ear on the back of the fabric. Just to clarify, each ear should have 3 layers. The traced piece face to face with another piece of fleece, and then the foam underneath, making 3 layers. Then go ahead and stitch them up. If some of the pieces shifted just a little bit, it won't make a big deal, as long as you didn't sew over any of the edges. To clean it up, we just have to trim around it. It's easier to tell where to cut if you flip it over and look at the back. Cut about a 1/4 inch around the stitch line. Make sure you're cutting through all 3 layers. And then right up to the edge on this side. Next, you just turn them inside out from the green. And then the foam will go on the inside. You might want to trim a little bit of the extra foam. Then just stitch them closed. For this, I just use a simple whip stitch. Now we're ready to sew these on. First, I'm going to pin them down to see how it looks, to get the placement that I want. That's how he's looking right now, and I'm really liking that a lot. Make sure it's even. Now I'm going to use the same ladder stitch that I used to put the nose on, going all the way around the ear. And there are his ears. Now it's time to put his eyes on. Based on the comments, I decided to go with the yellow eyes. Now the best way to go about putting the eyes on is that what I do is I actually pin them in place first. So let me find a place where I like them, right about there. And I actually put pins going all the way around the eyes to kind of hold them in place. So that's about what I'm looking for right there. Now these pins are going to make it much easier for me to place the eyes in the exact same spot after I put the glue on. So let me do that now. To glue them on, I like to use contact cement. Coat the back of this eye with the contact cement. I'll set that down to dry. And I'll do the same with this one. Now let's put the contact cement right onto the fleece. Now this is going to be a very secure bond. It's not going to go anywhere. And also, since these eyes are not hollow, we'll get a really solid attachment. So I'll let that dry for a couple minutes. Okay, they're all dried up. Now let's put these eyes on. Just right, lined up with the pins. Okay. And then I'll get this one on. Okay. And now that they're on there, I'll press them in real good. Take out these pins. And there are the eyes. Alright, now time for the pupils. If you want to see how I made these, I have a whole video just on pupils that you can click on right here. Okay, so let's put these on. That is looking good to me. There we have a couple eyes. Let's make them some thin eyebrows out of felt too. Just take a little piece of felt, clip some off, whatever size you want. Then gently spray them with some glue. Okay, now my eyebrows are here, they're all dry. Let's carefully stick them on. About like that, looks good to me. Makes them look a little more lively. Perfect, perfect. Now the last thing we're gonna do in this video is make a foam tongue. I'm gonna use a little piece of L200 EVA foam. I start off just by drawing a simple shape for a tongue that I want. Kind of heart shaped. Then I carefully cut it out with scissors. I have a shape kind of like that. Now I'm just gonna do some sculpting with the scissors themselves, taking the edge off of it, trying to make it into more of an organic shape. I can make the little crease in the tongue by bending this in half and then carefully just trimming a little bit off the edge. I start to get that little crease in the middle there. Okay? I just do a little more shaping. Next I do even more shaping with sandpaper to kind of smooth it all out. So here's the tongue all sculpted out. Now I'm going to give it a quick coat of spray paint and we're ready to put it in. It's all painted, let's put it in. To glue it in, I'm just going to use some contact cement. So I'll spread it right on there. And what I actually like to do is use it like a stamp. And it'll leave like a residue inside the mouth so they can pull it off. Now that's not enough glue to reattach it necessarily, but it marks it. So that now I can go in with the brush here and watch out for strings. And then I can lace them in there. You could also use fabric tack. That works well. And then once it's tacky, you can just set it down in. And then there we have our puppet. He's almost done. He just needs arms and an outfit. Now looking at him, I can't quite decide whether I want him to be a rod puppet or a live hand. I'm leaning more toward rod puppet based on the design, but I'll let you guys decide. Leave a comment below whether you'd like to see him be a live hand puppet or a rod puppet. Today I'm going to show you how to make live hands for your puppet that look kind of like this. Now there are many advantages to having hands like this for your puppet. Your character will be able to pick things up, grab things, interact in a way that other rod puppets just can't. I already did a video on how to make rods. Click here if you want to see the video that I already made on how to make rod hand puppets with posable fingers. Let's get started. I'm going to draw the pattern out on some paper. You want to make sure that the pattern is going to fit your hand, so I'm going to start off by making sure that the lines are on the outside of my hand. So I'll make a line there, and I'll make a line over here too. So that's about how wide we need the pattern to be. Looks like it's about 5 inches. So that's the main shape. Knowing there's going to be 2 fingers in the last slot, I'm going to divide this about evenly. I'm going to make the fingers about 2 inches long. And then just draw fingers within there. So that's about the size that I want for the fingers. So I'm going to line up my thumb about where it goes to, which is right here. So I'm looking for a pattern about that size. That looks good. So you can use the pattern that we just made, or you can print this one out from my website. So obviously make sure you use the same fleece. Now when you're laying out the hand pattern, you want to make sure the stretch is going this way. That'll make it easier to get your hand in, and allow the glove to compensate different sized hands. Now the way I like to do it is to actually double it up. So I'm going to fold this over on itself, then I'll carefully trace out the hand. Make sure to flip it over when you trace it again. And I actually like to have longer sleeves on my arms, so I'm going to extend it about 6 inches down. If you wanted to, you could actually extend the pattern before you trace it on, or you can just draw it on after like we did. Okay, so both of our hands are traced on there, so now what I'm going to do is stitch right through both layers. Make sure that you double this fabric over so that it becomes a glove. I'm going to stitch right on the inside of the lines, ignoring, of course, this one here. So now it's all stitched up. If you're going to use this pattern to make fur hands, you're going to want to cut all the pieces out first and then sew them by hand. Stitching around the fingers on the machine doesn't really work with a long pile fur. So now let's cut this out. It's easier to see the stitch lines if you look at the back. Now I'll just turn them inside out. And there they are. For my puppets, I use this only as the hand. I do a separate piece as the forearm. This long part is not part of the arm. This is just to give the puppeteer clearance when filming. So let's make those forearms. We're gonna use some more fleece. This time, the long way, you don't want the stretch. I'm going to have the forearms be about 7 inches long, so I'm going to add a ½ inch of seam allowance on each end, making it 8 inches long. 8 inches to be about 5 inches wide. So that shape should do it. Make sure the stretch is going this way. We don't want the arm to be able to stretch. So now I'm going to fold it over on itself so we can get 2 when we cut it out. And these are going to be our forearms. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over this way and stitch along this edge and along this end. But I'm going to leave these ends open so we can stick the foam inside. So these are all stitched up now. Now let's cut out some foam. You want to make it about an inch wide. So maybe I'll go just a hair more than an inch. Like that. And then I'll do another one here. And then again, it should be about, so now it should be about 7 inches tall. So this is the foam for the forearms. Now you can see that they're square. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use scissors to trim the corners off. It'll take a little bit of the edge off and make it a little bit smoother. It doesn't need to be perfect. Now we have to put this foam inside of the sleeve. You could turn this inside out and try sticking it in, but there's a lot of friction and it's kind of difficult. The easiest way I found is to lay them next to each other and then use something like a pencil, and you can kind of really quickly slide it right through like that. Next, I'm going to stitch these ends closed. Since it's a seam that's going to be up against something else, I'm just going to use a whip stitch. Now there's many different ways to do this. Some people like it pretty low, some people like it high. If you have it lower, I think that this piece acts more as a bicep, and then this acts kind of as the forearm. I personally like to have mine way up high. Now the next step is to attach the forearm to the hand. Okay, now we have these forearms attached to our hands, and now let's stitch them on. To start off by just kind of pinning it where I think it should go, which is right about here. I want to make sure they're even. So let me see here, put it right about there. There we go. And I'll actually use a whip stitch on this too, because that's a really strong stitch. You can see that I'm just stitching all the way around. It's pretty straightforward. Alright, now we have one on. Let's do the other one. Now let's see how that feels. Wow, that feels good. Look at these hands. Now I can scratch my head, pick my nose, whatever I want. After watching that short clip, a few of you might be wondering how I operated both hands and the head. In order to get a puppet like this completely animated, you need 2 puppeteers. So I was doing one hand and the head, and another whole person was doing the other hand. That's how they do it on TV shows too. If these videos are not fulfilling your puppetry needs, join the community. Shop Facebook group is a great resource for people to learn about all different types of puppetry. If you join, make sure you read the rules before posting. It's a great community, but we don't want a lot of spam. So please, read the rules and think before you post. So I have a couple more videos coming up. I'm going to show you how to make a shirt for this guy. I'm going to do a specific video on sewing techniques for fleece. Please give this video a big thumbs up and go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Keep making puppets. See you next time. Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make a simple shirt for this puppet using secondhand clothes. I like using secondhand clothes because good apparel fabric is hard to find. Places like Joann's and other local fabric stores usually don't have very good apparel fabric. Joann's mostly has like quilting and costuming fabric, not ideal for making clothes. By getting secondhand clothes, you can get really good fabric at a really cheap price. So one thing a lot of people do when making clothes for a puppet is a lot of times they'll get like old kids' clothes and try to fit that on. Kids' clothes are not proportioned to most puppets. What I like to do is buy like double or triple XL size shirts and use them as fabric to make the clothes. Sometimes if you're lucky you can use pieces still. Sometimes I like to use part of the collars and where the buttons and buttonholes are. Let's get started. So let me start off just by putting this on my character here. Now looking at it, these collars are way too large. So what I'm going to do is cut them down to about, I'm going to cut about 1.5 inches off the width. So now I have this collar off. Now let's kind of fit this to about the size. So I'm deciding I want to reuse these buttons and buttonholes. Have the buttons centered. Find the ends of the shoulders. You want to put the shoulder lines where they should be, which in this case I can feel it right about there. I'll put a pin there. I want to find about how wide to make it. I'll mark it there with a pin in the front and in the back. Now a lot of these measurements I'm going to actually transfer to the other side. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. Okay, so here's our shirt. I buttoned it back up so we can make sure it's symmetrical. Now it looks like on this puppet, from the center of the shirt, which is the center of the buttons, it's about 5.5 inches from the side. So I'm actually going to just go for it, and I'm going to use a Sharpie. I would normally use pencil, but I'm going to use a Sharpie so that you guys can see it a little better, hopefully, in the camera. So, and since I'm using the marker, I'm also going to compensate for seam allowance a little bit and go to the outside. So I'm going to draw a line down about here. And then that's my shoulder seam. So I'm going to have it come down like this, down like that. So let me cut that out. Just like that. So now that that is all cut out, I have to mirror that on the other side. So I'm just going to trace it, fold it over and trace it. So let's see here, make sure I fold it right on the center there. Well, this has a shirt pocket on it. For right now I'm going to ignore it, but I'm going to carefully take those seams out a little later. So there we have that. So next I want to do this part of the sleeves. So I'm actually going to draft that. So his arm is 7 inches long. I'm going to add 2 inches to that. 1 inch is to allow for a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. The other inch is just so it's not too snug. Clothes are a little bit more loose rather than being completely form-fitting like making a fleece covering. So I'm going to make it 9 inches long. And for that I'm going to use some of this scrap from the rest of the shirt. I'm going to quickly draw out a pattern for the sleeve. The pattern has to be about the width of the shirt. So the shape of a sleeve is kind of like this. That looks like that'll fit. So then I think this will be my pattern. Like that. Let's see how that fits. That looks good there. Might be a little bit too long. Let me cut off about 1.5 inches. Here we have it. So I doubled up this fabric here. I'm going to trace out my sleeve pattern. So now what I have to do is stitch this sleeve along this edge from there to there. Alright, there it is. I just stitched those parts of the sleeve on. What I'm going to do next is the part that would cover up the hands, the cuffs, and the rest of the arm. Yeah, unfortunately these cuffs are too small for my actual hands, so we're gonna have to make our own. Real cuffs are actually a little bit more complicated to make than you would think because of the way that this vent is there. Now for a puppet, we don't really have to make it that same way. We're gonna simplify it. So let's actually cut the sleeve off right under where the vent is. And let's see if that gives us, oh yeah, that's definitely big enough for the hand to go through. Is it long enough to cover up this whole thing? Yes, it is. Now let me just cut this evenly across. How about right there? So these are going to be our sleeves, but now let's make the cuffs. So this was the lower back of the shirt. I just used interfacing and ironed it onto it to make it a little stiffer, give it a little bit more body. That's an important step for making the cuffs. Okay, so this is our sleeve. So each cuff needs to be about, well, it has to be 13 inches long. So I'm getting short on my fabric, so I'm going to do mine about 12 inches long. So I'm going to stitch up these edges, but I'm going to give it a curve toward the top. So I just stitch those up, and I'll be trimming from the stitch line. So it's got a slight curve at the top, if you can see that. Let me turn them and steam them. And there they are. So here are our sleeves that are going to be connected to the cuffs right there. Now what I'm going to do is just put a little 1/2 inch notch in each corner. That will leave me room for the seam allowance and let me know where to stop when stitching on the cuffs. Just like that. So now from notch to notch, I'm going to stitch on those cuffs. Alright, so I just stitched that on and I did all the top stitching around it, which really makes it look like a cuff. So, and I left out this 1/2 inch of seam allowance so I can stitch that up too. Now again, that's not how actual cuffs are made on a shirt, but it will look pretty much the same and it'll be perfect for a puppet. So now what I'm going to do is stitch up this section here and then up the cuffs. So now the cuff sleeves are all finished. Now next thing we have to do is match up the armholes. We'll do the armholes right under the cuffs. So we'll just cut that hole in, and now I'm going to cut a strip going right up the center of that hole. This will make it much easier for me to stitch on the sleeve. Now there are other ways to do this. This is just the way that I'm used to it, and I think it's the easiest and fastest way to stitch it on. So I just stitched up this whole side. This whole side is completely done. This side just needs one seam. That's why I cut that extra line from the hole where we attach the arms, because now it just takes one long seam going all the way, let me show you on this side, going all the way around this inside edge to complete the shirt. So I'm going to do this side, and then we'll do the collar, and then we'll be done. Let me turn it inside out, and then this side is done. There he is. It's really starting to look like a shirt now. Last thing is the collar. So first thing I have to do is use a seam ripper and take out the remains of the collar that's left, and then we'll just set in the new one, and then we'll be done. Now let's get this collar in. I'll pin it in. Alright, just stitched it up and it's done. So let's just, let me wrestle this onto this guy. The hardest part is getting all this bulk through the short, or rather, the forearm, because it's so narrow. But that's the design of the puppet, so that's what we're doing. It's not that bad though. And there it is. Fits like a glove. This might be a difficult tutorial for some of you to follow. The reason for that is that there's no really way around it. Making clothes for puppets is a lot like making clothes for people. There's a lot of advanced sewing techniques used, and just to be clear, this is not a tutorial on how to use a sewing machine, so I cut most of those parts out. This is really a video about how to get the fit onto a puppet, since their body types are different than human, and how to alter existing clothes to fit your puppet. And this is officially the final video for the series of this live hand puppet. I want to do another whole series on puppet building for a monster character. Hopefully that'll come out next summer. But don't worry, there's going to be a whole bunch of videos between now and then. I have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. So stay tuned. Until then, see you next time.